I know you're joining us to talk about your experience in the Air Force. What was that experience like for those who probably didn't get to experience that firsthand?
Well, lots of different ways to have an experience in the Air Force. I'll give you mine in particular. It started back in 1980 when I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy. I joined the Air Force then as a cadet with aspirations of going into astronautical engineering. I went to school there and worked hard for 4 years on both being an astronautical engineer, also at being a military officer. Just the main reason I went to the Air Force Academy is to go and not just fight wars, but to be a leader of people who were out there fighting as well. When I came out of there, I went off to undergraduate helicopter pilot training in Fort Rucker, Alabama. So my first year with the Air Force was spent in the U.S. Army, learning how to fly helicopters. After that, I went out to Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico, learned how to fly combat rescue helicopters. It was called the Jolly Green Giant at the time. And from there, I was stationed at Myrtle Beach Air Force Base flying combat rescue for about almost 2 years. From there, I went down to Florida and transitioned to flying special operations helicopters. We actually got to pick up brand new H-60 Black Hawk helicopters from the factory and fly them down there. And that's where I actually saw air combat for the first time. Down in 1989 in Panama, I got to fly Just Cause, where we were going after their dictator down in Manuel Noriega. About a year later, I would be back over in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, and Iraq, fighting in Desert Shield and Desert Storm, doing the same thing again with Saddam Hussein. A year after that, I would be back over in Turkey, providing assistance to the Kurds up in northern Iraq. So when I was done with my tour in Florida, I put in for test pilot school. I had not gone to jet training, so I went first to Vance Air Force Base on to fly jets, and then went to the Navy Test Pilot School at Patuxent River, Maryland, not far from here, to learn how to find out how to test flying. From there, I went out to Edwards Air Force Base and just took up my time as a line test pilot. Whatever came down the docket is what they gave you to go fly. You went and flew test missions and told them whether their airplanes flew well or did not. Lots of other support activities out there as well, chasing other airplanes or doing test plans or just making sure planes are ready to go fly. Did about 4 years of that, and then I did a staff tour at Air Combat Command headquarters at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. Back again, supporting people who were doing combat rescue. We were looking at buying replacement aircraft, something to replace the old antiquated things that I'd picked up from the factory. I didn't think they were that old. And then from there, I was going to rotate back down to Eglin Air Force Base in the north of Florida to go command a test flying squadron out there. That got interrupted when I got a phone call from Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. They asked me if I was interested in becoming an astronaut. I'd interviewed and had done well enough that they picked me up from there. So I spent the last 10 years in the Air Force training for and flying on space shuttle missions down at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, and building the International Space Station. And I retired from there back in 2010.
What are some of the things that you took away from that experience?
Yeah, it was definitely humbling. It's one of the things where you have your aspirations, then you have things you don't necessarily expect.
Yes.
I'd love to go do these things, but I'm never going to get those opportunities. So every time I got that through my head, there was always somebody there telling me, no, you need to keep pressing ahead with this particular thing. When I got into the Air Force Academy, I had a talk with the dean of the physics department at the time, and I said, I want to do aerospace engineering. And he said, well, that's great. He says, if you do well in a technical degree like engineering and you are a decent pilot, you can become a test pilot. Test pilots can become astronauts. And it was that laying that flags to a path out. So you'll find that if you let people know what your goals and aspirations are, they can be extremely helpful in trying to reorienting you when you decide that you've gone as far as you're going to go. You've got a lot farther to go than you think you can.
So you decided where you wanted to go. How did you find where you wanted to go, and how can they find where they want to go?
Okay, so for me, lucky or unlucky, I don't know, I knew at 4 1/2 that I wanted to fly airplanes. I'd gone out to an airport to see my dad off on a business trip, and back then they had observation decks. And I watched these jets taking off and flying, and I thought, I have to go do this. This is what I need to go do. This looks like fun. And my parents were happy to encourage me to go do that. Maybe about a 1.5 years later, I was watching the Apollo program go on. These rockets lifting off and just going into the sky and just completely disappearing. And a year later, we were on the moon. I remember asking my dad, wow, what kind of job do you need to have where you can make enough money that you can pay to go walk on the moon like these people? He goes, there's a job called astronaut, and they pay you to walk on the moon. And I'm like, let me get this right. They're paying you, pay me to go walk on the moon. Like, how do I get that job? And He told me you got to work hard, you have to get good grades, stay out of trouble. And then I was in this quandary, like, well, should I be a pilot or should I be an astronaut? He goes, you can do both of those things. And so I would say the advice I would have to anybody out there is to try lots of different things. You can do both those things. As it turned out, that when I began flying, I did enjoy it. I didn't necessarily, I didn't suspect I wouldn't, but there's always a chance you'll get out there and go, I really don't like flying. I did. I liked engineering. I liked all those things that went along with it, so it just turned out well. But you may get out somewhere and decide, what I really want to do is sing, or what I really want to do is neurosurgery, or something to that effect. So go try different things out there, expose yourself. At some point, you'll, like the hairs in the back of your neck will raise up and go, this is what I need to be doing. And I got a feeling you had that experience yourself already at some point. And then just go pursue that with a certain amount of passion.
Well, it also takes the inspiration, like your parents inspired you. I mean, and plus, your story is similar to a lot of people who said they looked up in the sky and said, I want to fly that plane. A lot of people, they don't think much of it, but you did, and you came out with this positive result. When you were flying those planes, were there any fears you had, anything that was stopping you from doing that you overcame to be able to do it?
I said the biggest issue was always just self-doubt. The first time you step up to an airplane and you see how big this thing is, and it costs millions of dollars. Like, who am I to get behind the controls of this airplane and go roaring around the sky and bring it safely back? And you've got instructors going, look, I wouldn't be giving you the keys to this plane if I didn't have every confidence that you were going to come back, and that's my job on the line. So the least you can do is have confidence in yourself too. Go fly that airplane. And there's time and time again where you'll get to that spot where you think, am I ready for this? And it helps always to have somebody there who just go give it a shot. Just give it one more step. Go, if you can see a mile, go another mile. And keep doing that. Yes.
They're usually our biggest enemy when it comes to doing things like these.
Yeah. So on the other side of that, for everybody who's encouraged me, there were also other people out there, usually with the best of intentions, telling me, no, your chances of succeeding in this are pretty slim. Why don't you do something more reasonable? You can go be an insurance actuary or an accountant. You had a better chance of succeeding at that, but that wasn't what was driving me. And so it's that balance of, sometimes they're giving you good advice. Sometimes you go, I know your advice is well intended, but I will still go poke at this dragon anyway to see what happens. And sometimes you say you'll get conflicting advice. I was always more inclined to believe people who told me I could do something than people who told me I couldn't do something.
Now you were flying planes. What were some of the planes that you did get to fly? How did that turn out?
So for me, it was very rewarding to go fly different airplanes. I started off flying helicopters, and helicopters is the best way to describe it is like going out motocross or four-wheeling. It's rough, it's tumble, it's you come back spattered in mud and things like that, and it's that sense of adrenaline. I wouldn't say it's very intellectually challenging though. It does have its parts of the mission that are, but the flying itself is not. Whereas if you're out in a supersonic jet, like I got to go fly T-38s or F-16s. You're out there planning. You've got to be, say, a minute ahead of that airplane at all times. And some of that plane is going the speed of sound, which puts you a long way out, where you're running math. Okay, if I'm going to dive, I need to pull out of this dive with this many G's by this amount of altitude, or I will hit the ground. There's a certain part where you're watching the sky, the ground drop away dramatically if you're flying up at 500 knots, or if you're a helicopter, you're flying at treetop level. You're flying beneath power lines. It's its own separate set of sensations. So I'm grateful that I got to do both of those different things and not just one of them.
Well, I think when you're at that point, you're at the point of no return. You have to do this, and there's a lot of mathematics that go into that. Mm-hmm. So when you were in school, how did they teach you? What were the things that they taught you about the math? Because it's not just going up into the sky and you're in midair and you're flying. Yeah. There's math that goes into it. Math. What's that math?
Okay, so they tried the standard math with me initially, and I have to confess I was never a big fan of math. It was not love at first sight. They give this problem, like you've got 5 apples and you're going to give 2 to Jenny. How many apples do you have left? First, why would I give Jenny 2 of my apples? I don't necessarily like Jenny that much. So what's the point of this? And I just didn't quite grasp that piece there. I went through it because I had to pass, and so I learned my long division. It was somewhere around 7th grade where they gave me my first real word problem. It was a case where there was a sailboat in distress at a certain set of coordinates. You've got a rescue helicopter of all things. I'm 11 or 12. And you've got to take off and fly towards this boat that is steaming south at this particular speed. Where are you going to meet that boat? How long is it going to take you? And in what direction you're going to fly? And then math suddenly wasn't a bunch of numbers or some pointless exercise and giving somebody else my apples. I can do something cool with this math. I can go out and rescue somebody in distress off of a sailboat, and it had my full attention. This is a tool by which I can go do good things. It's like if you gave me a hammer and a saw, so what? But if you show me that I can go build a house or a beautiful piece of furniture, now I care about that hammer and saw. So for me, it was all the motivation, and then the poor teachers that put with me asking me millions of questions as opposed to trying to keep me paying attention in class.
Well, it's how you view it.
Yes.
When anyone sees math, it looks confusing. It looks as if you don't want to do it. But when you do have that motivation like you did, it becomes more than just math and numbers on the board. It becomes buildings. It becomes highways. It becomes cars. And for you, it was planes.
Yeah, it's a language. And that's what I finally figured out late in life, that math is just a language. So imagine if you want to be a football star, but for some reason, everybody who plays football can only do football in German. Well, you might not care about learning German, but suddenly you care about football, so you will learn German so you can go play football. Same thing with math. There's so many things that you cannot do without the math that it's worth learning this language called math in order to do it. And when it comes down to it, math is simply shorthand language for just concepts out there that just make sense. But you don't want to spend 20 pages doing it. You can nest it down into a simple, elegant equation. And if you can look at that symbol and understand the concept behind it, that's really what math is. It's just that symbols telling you what a word or a set of definitions that go behind it.
What are some of the connections that you have that are long-lasting and you still have to this day?
So when I first announced I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, I had an aunt who had a friend who was a Tuskegee Airman, and he had an airplane out in one of the fields near Washington, D.C. I remember sitting out in his King Air airplane, and he's explained to me all the different things about what it was like to be a Tuskegee Airman and flying. And so it wasn't just with him, but it was with this whole group of folks out there, tall Tuskegee Airmen, who had set that path in front of us, where I continuously crossed paths with these folks out there, and they were always very, very helpful, up to and including General Charles McGee, who just turned 100 years old, became a brigadier general a few weeks ago. We're still trading stories. He's still giving me useful advice. It's hard to believe I'm in my almost 60 and still getting great advice from somebody, but he's got about 40 years on me still, so there's lots to learn from him.
Tuskegee Airmen made history. What's your outlook on that opportunity? Do you view it as, oh, I'm just another person who's doing this, or this is an honor for you? How do you view that?
Okay, so a couple of different ways. So the first thing was back in, I told you about that moment where I watched the Apollo 11 crew land, and I asked about, should I become an astronaut? The next question that came out of my mouth was, can somebody black actually be an astronaut? This was just after the Civil Rights Act had just been passed, and so there's still segregation had not departed from our society. And my dad said, sure, we've actually had, the Air Force has already picked a black astronaut. Man, he was unfortunately killed in an aircraft accident, but it was all I needed to know. So once that barrier was down, it was on me at that point. If I didn't succeed, it was because I had failed, not because there was some barrier out there, social barrier between me and that goal. I didn't have the excuse. So from my perspective, what they did was socially significant. Benjamin O. Davis, the first commander of the Tuskegee Airmen, said his least favorite words in the English language were first and only. And what I liked best about my job was all the things I did as a pilot and as an astronaut. None of them were first or onlys. It was just a regular thing. Nobody raised their eyebrows. Isn't it great that you're a black pilot? No, this is great that you're a pilot. Or you're just, here's your helmet, get to work. Nobody said, isn't it great that you're a black test pilot? No, there's lots of black test pilots out there. Get to work. When I became an astronaut, and say, isn't it great that you're a black astronaut? No, there were plenty of black astronauts still working next to me. Here's your spacesuit, get to work. So, in one sense, the fact that nothing I'm doing is significant, I find to be of great significance to me. It's a normal thing. We're out there. They have paved that path to where we're just accepted, and there's nothing unusual. All you have to do is have the drive and work hard and go out there and get it. There's no excuse for anybody out there to not try.
The original intent and goal was to make it normal and mainstream, and the fact that you had not used, your race as an excuse for not getting things done is inspiring to me. I'm sure it's going to be inspiring to many other people. What should they do?
Not only have we done it, we're still doing it. So what's your reason for sitting back and saying you can't do it? We've been in the White House, we've been in space, we've been heads of Fortune 500 companies. What exactly do you think was holding those people back?
Yes.
And those are the same things that are holding you back. So get off your tail and go.
So you spent some time as an astronaut as well. There are mathematics in that just as there are in the Air Force. So as an astronaut, what's that experience like for those who probably may not ever get to experience that or want to experience that?
So for me, the big difference between flying spacecraft and flying aircraft was just the speed with which things happen. When that rocket takes off from the pad, you watch the sky go from sky blue to cobalt blue to midnight blue to black in real time. I mean, it's getting darker right before your eyes because you are going straight up at 15 times the speed of sound, which is hard for your mind to imagine. That when the engine's cut off, you're going 5 miles every second. You can cross the entirety of Washington, D.C. in a second and a half. That's how long it takes. And so when you get up there and you're dealing with that, it's just different. You are not going to now think miles ahead of that spacecraft because that's a fraction of a second in terms of spacecraft speed. So you're playing things usually orbits away, hours away. You're setting things up, and ironically, you make things happen a whole lot slower. When we docked to the International Space Station with the shuttle, we could hit the shuttle at exactly 3 inches per second and no faster. Now these two spacecraft, going at 18,000 miles an hour, except one's going at 18,000 miles an hour plus 3 inches per second. When you're out there looking at it, though, you don't get that sensation of speed. It's just this slow, gentle bumping against this bigger spacecraft. But if you look at the Earth, it's going by you. It's going by you very quickly. For me, also, navigation. An airplane, even in 35,000 feet, going at 600 miles an hour, you can see Dulles Airport in the distance, and you're still maybe 10, 15 minutes away from landing at Dulles Airport. If you are in space and you're trying to get a picture of Washington, D.C., first off, there's no lines on the map. It's just that you got clouds, you got rivers, so you got to go figure out that's the Chesapeake Bay, that's the Potomac River. That bend in the Potomac River is right where the D.C. is. I can see kind of a grayish smear from the cement and asphalt that is D.C. And oh, by the way, you're moving at it at 17,500 miles an hour. So you've got about a second or two to get your camera out, get it framed up, get it focused, set your exposure, and snap before it's over the horizon and gone again. And then you go, wow, this is moving fast. Fortunately, 90 minutes later, you may get another shot at it from the distance, but you won't get that straight overhead shot. Look at it again. Coming back, remember in helicopters, we would do what we call auto rotations, where you chop the engine and you fall out of the sky like a kitchen appliance. And you're just plumbing out of the sky, and things are happening at hundreds of feet per minute toward the ground. And I realized when I was flying a shuttle, we were coming out of the sky, and the gauges all look the same. Whereas in a H-3 helicopter, you might come out of the sky at 1,500 feet per minute. In a shuttle, you come out of the sky at 1,500 feet per second. Everything's happening 60 times faster when you're coming out. You're starting from a whole lot higher altitude. So they all seem to elapse at the same rate. You're just covering a whole lot more distance. And so things, again, when you're moving that fast, you don't turn very quickly, or so you set things up a long way out. So ironically, things actually happen slower in what you're doing because you're setting up your landing minutes in advance as opposed to seconds in advance. Just a very different way of going about flying. It took a little bit of getting used to after especially the thousands of hours of flying helicopters and jets.
So as you're moving that fast, what are your tasks that you're assigned, and what everybody else is doing as
Yes.
you're moving at that speed?
Yes. So again, they don't send me up there in space just for recreation, so it wasn't there to take in the view. We were building the International Space Station. So our first job once we got into space was to locate the International Space Station and chase it down, to rendezvous and dock with it, open the hatches up and get aboard and start our real work. We had pieces of the space station, to bring aboard. And so we had these cranes, they call them robot arms, to go grapple the pieces out of the shuttle payload bay, pick them up and stick them onto the space station. Well, the space station doesn't do it by himself. There's an astronaut in there operating that crane to make it happen. There were also people outside who were doing spacewalks who, once things are latched to the space station, to bolt them down, to hook up cooling, to hook up electrical power, to hook up data lines, and bring those particular pieces back in. There's also folks inside to get those spacewalking astronauts out of the airlock and back into the airlock. There was never nothing to do during both of my 2-week-long missions.
So has there ever been anything about space that was overwhelming, or was it just, hey, I'm here to do my job just as anyone else is doing? Well, I'm just doing it, more than 1,000 miles per hour in space.
So you can tell yourself that, but yeah, Mother Nature will not be ignored.
Yes.
Simple as that. So I remember going on my first spacewalk. I want to get out here and just be focused. I don't care how beautiful the Earth is, the universe. I've got 8 hours worth of work to do with 6.5 hours worth of air, so I need to be busy from the time I go out the door. I go out of the airlock, and I'm right over top of the Amazon rainforest. And it is a crystal clear summer afternoon in February down in the Amazon. I can see the muddy waters of the Amazon. I can see the snow-capped peaks of the Andes Mountains. I can see the muddy delta out in the Atlantic Ocean. and I couldn't take my eyes off of it. It was like, this is gorgeous. How many people get to see the Amazon rainforest from 250 miles up while you're going overhead? And I'm like, trying to, and my fellow spacewalker, who's one of the more senior veterans, just starts laughing. He goes, Alvin, relax and take it in. We got plenty of time to go get your work done afterwards. Even spacewalkers don't get to see the entirety of the Amazon from that far up because it's usually covered in clouds. It's a rainforest. The other incident was one where we were over the Indian Ocean, and we were on our way back from our last mission with Discovery, and we could just see on the horizon just this faint bluish-green glow, which meant that that was an aurora. Now, the northern hemisphere lights are called the aurora borealis, in the south they're called the aurora australis, and it became clear to us in a few seconds that we were going to go right over top of this. We were going to split the uprights over this aurora, and this was a great photo opportunity. And of course, our cameras are all packed up because we're about to go land, and so we're unpacking the cameras, and we're yelling, and we're trying. You guys know, you're setting the f-stops. You're trying to set the get the right lens on there. You want to get everything, different cameras set up for different shots, and get different pieces of this. And we're just having a mad panic. You even thought we were about to die. And then the time came. We got the cameras, we're in the windows, and we go straight to this aurora. And we're just getting pictures, and we're trying hard just not to have our jaws hanging down. It was just this glorious moment. And then we pop out of the backside into sunlight over Western Australia, and cleaned up our mess and got ready to come home again. So there are moments that just won't be ignored when you're in space, even though you might think you're there strictly for business.
Even if it is strictly for business, it's a life-changing experience. It's something that not everyone gets to see. I know you probably think of that as just, well, this is work. Well, and that's what you just told us, that it definitely wasn't work. It was more than that.
Much more.
Were there ever times where you were ever concerned about being in space?
So anyone who's on a crew with you who doesn't really appreciate the dangers of being in space, as say they're not somewhat scared, don't fly with them. They're either don't have all their sensibilities, or they just don't understand the situation around them. There's always dangers, and that first 8.5 minutes riding that rocket into space is a controlled explosion. A lot of really brilliant engineers have tried to shape that explosion such that you survive it, but at the end of that explosion, you're going to wind up 100 miles up in space going 17,500 miles an hour. It's a very violent 8.5 minutes where everything has to go exactly right. And if you take it for granted that all things are going to go exactly right, you just don't understand it. So anytime you're strapping in, that's what you're thinking about, because there's often times where you don't quite get to your orbital speed, you're going to have to land in Europe. And so you need to be planning how you're going to land in Europe, because nobody's expecting you, and you're not expecting to go there. And so you channel that anxiety into constructive energies and making sure that you're prepared for whatever comes at you. But yeah, you always have that anxiety, and you should have that anxiety. It's what will keep you alive if something goes wrong.
Thank you so much for joining me.
You bet.